Welcome back to my channel, where we profile and deep dive to the most interesting subjects and the most successful business stories. Today, we're going to talk about someone who's one of, in fact, most influential African entrepreneurs on a global scale. This is a man who wears many hats, a billionaire entrepreneur, none other than Mr. Tony Elumelu. And what are the lessons us as entrepreneurs we can learn from his life and profile and see how could we implement these in our lives? Mr. Tony Elumelu, if you don't know him, you're living under a rock. Everybody has benefited from one of this man's services, whether it's from being a bank with UBA or being inspired by him or being working for one of his companies. He's a credible individual. So today we're going to look at what are the lessons we can learn from this individual and how can we apply them to our life. Who is Mr. Tony Elumelu? He's a banker. He's been a banker for X amount of years, and he's been building one of the most important banks, which is UBA. One of the first things I think we can learn from this man is the power of long-term thinking or long-term vision. If you think about when he started I think as a banker at All States Bank. Then from there, rose to the leadership of All States Bank. Then they decided to form their own bank, which was Standard Trust Bank. And from Standard Trust Bank, they built it to a point. They did a merger and acquisition with now UBA to become what is the UBA of today. So that's someone who had a long-term vision, because that's a roadmap. That's someone who clearly mapped out where he was going and knew from the beginning how he wanted to achieve it. So I think one of the key lessons we can learn from this individual is how do we must have long-term visions. They're key important in implementing long-term corporate goals or having sustainable success. The second thing I think we can learn from Mr. Elumelu is the ability to leverage networks. If you see what is achieved, first of all, being a successful banker is about having a good network, because who's going to deposit in your bank if you don't have a network? And launching the Tony Elumelu Foundation and all his companies, you see the power of a strong network, or how he's been able to leverage networks into achieving what he's been able to achieve. So I think those are one of the key ingredients that we as entrepreneurs can look and say, okay, how do we model this? How do we think about building networks? How do we leverage networks to at least achieve our goals? The third lesson I think we can get from this man is we must be committed to the story of Africa. And this is a very unique one I've seen, because he's not just a businessman, he's also someone who founded the philosophy called Afri-capitalism. And this is where we prioritize profit and purpose together, not just profit at the expense of purpose. But and his belief in Africa, his commitment to Africa and other entrepreneurs and everybody and his businesses speaks something to the testament of the man. I think his companies are based in over 20 African countries now, and they do business on these countries. He's been welcomed by presidents and institutions across Africa. So this is one of the pioneering things I see about this guy. They're pioneering the next generation of African institutions. The fourth lesson I think we can grab from this guy is diversification. If you think about it, his companies span a long part of the economy, from banking to hospitality to power to insurance to financial services. So this is somebody whose company are going to weather any kind of market fluctuations. So there will always be a revenue at some point, and there will always be some form of business or market moving entity around his companies. So I think that's a key thing we need to look at, as that is very core to Mr. Tony Elumelu. And the fifth thing we can see is the ability to build social capital. If you look at Tony Elumelu, he's probably one of the most active businessmen on Instagram. Do you understand? Like he's taking the Instagram like he's in his 20s. Do you understand? So I think that's a defining characteristic of this guy. So he's been able to build other capital with the influence he has from the Tony Elumelu Foundation. He's one of the people that have his platform to speak on the World Economic Forum and every other global institution, the United Nations and other global institutions, and already providing a new wave of African leadership. So I think that's social capital, which has also led me to think or have his next lesson, which we can learn from this guy, is the ability to have strategic partnerships. And if you look about it, you cannot have strategic partnerships without having a firm social capital. So these two tied together, he's leveraged the social capital to build strategic relationships in all his companies. So I think that's a key thing, because if you know he has his investors are major companies, I think sovereign wealth funds, companies, countries, they come together to work with him in Hairs Holdings, and the way he's been able to build this infrastructure across his group. I think that's one of the key lessons we can also learn from this man. The next one we can learn from Mr. Tony is corporate governance. I think we as entrepreneurs, we must find a way to have governance structures in all our companies. It's not easy when you start and small, but I think as we go along, as we go bigger, we must find a way to map out that corporate governance structures that are incredible across this man's company. Because if you look at the Tomelu's network of companies, there is no one group sitting on all the companies. Is UBA is sitting on its own, Hairs Holdings is sitting on its own, the Transcorp group is sitting on its own, and each one of these have strong corporate governance teams across the company. So I think that those are key things that we can see from Mr. Tony, and something that we can really look to and emulate on some form of having good governance or management structure in all our corporate or governance or management or business entities. The next one I think we can learn from this guy is we must build our personal brand. And I think that is something he's done extremely well, because if you look at Mr. Tony is a brand on his own. Like if you look at his companies, UBA is a different brand. If you look at Hairs Holdings is a different brand. And the man himself is a different brand, from his yoga to his showcasing his family on social media to a lot of all these things that are very, very, very forward thinking for a businessman, especially of his age. So he's taken to social media and built his personal brand today, because most people know Tony and they admire his lifestyle, so from his parties to his hobnobbing with superstars, so I think African superstars. So I think that's a key thing that we can learn from him. How do we build our brand to really resonate with an audience and let them follow us and us lead them in the best way possible? The next thing I see from Mr. Tony is we must be innovative. They're always coming up with a new product. They're always coming out with a new service. They're always leveraging the power of innovation across their company, and from launching microfinance, from launching online fintech platforms to insurance, to they're always revamping their brand, their association with the music scene. So I think he's launched a very innovative, even his own personal brand. That's something that's innovative. So he's launched a very innovative approach to how he does business, and he's across his companies. So I think those are one of the things we can also emulate from this man. And last but not least, which I think is one of the most important lessons you can learn from this man, is give back. Mr. Tony Elumelu launched a platform of $100 million to empower African entrepreneurs, and to date they've empowered 10,000 African entrepreneurs. So that's a testimony or a testament to the man of how do we as entrepreneurs leverage where we are to also give back in any way possible to our communities, our employees, our customers, or anything. Just have the ability to give back to our people, because Mr. Tony, all these qualities has contributed to what is the iconic standing this man has in African business society. Because if you look at Mr. Tony, the way the world has received him is very different than they received any other African leader. Because Mr. Tony has climbed into places like he was a guest of the former president of the United States, Mr. Obama, and that's something that is rare, because how many business leaders do you know are called to the White House or have the opportunity to meet with a sitting US president if you're not the president of a country? That's very rare. So and the way he's been received by the UN, the way his other world leaders have taken to him, his strategic relationship with other countries. So this is a testimony of the man, and the way he's pioneered a new wave of African leadership in making the world know that we're going from reliance to self-reliance and empowerment, because he's empowering other African entrepreneurs to be the best possible and serving as a role model to that. So I think that's one of the key things we can learn from this individual, because he's already defining what is the next level of African leadership. And I think everybody has to learn from this man on some level or another. Thanks for watching. I hope this video has inspired you. Like, share to someone who this video could motivate them. Subscribe and comment below. Wait down for my next video. Thanks for watching.